the Orphanage of the Holy Trinity. In 1642, when the ecclesiastical authorities of New Spain finally descended into the basements of the Orphanage of the Holy Trinity in San Miguel de Allende, they discovered something that would remain hidden in the Vatican's secret archives for nearly 4 centuries. 243 children, some so young they could barely speak, were crammed into windowless underground cells, branded with hot irons like cattle, waiting to be harvested for various purposes. What Bishop Francisco de Villalobos uncovered that March 17 was not merely an orphanage, but a factory of orphans, operating for 44 years under the control of the Morales family. Recently declassified documents reveal that this case was so disturbing that the Church ordered every trace of it sealed until modern times. And what I am about to tell you has never been told in full before. Before diving into the terrifying story of the Morales family and their reign of terror in San Miguel de Allende, make sure to subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications, and let us know in the comments from which country or city you're listening to this haunting tale. Now, let's step into the dark corridors of the Orphanage of the Holy Trinity. San Miguel de Allende, at the heart of New Spain, was a thriving colonial city at the end of the 16th century. Silver from the nearby mines of Guanajuato had created a society deeply divided. The Spanish families lived in rose-stone mansions surrounding the central plaza, while the indigenous and mestizo population crowded into the outer barrios, surviving on exhausting, poorly paid labor. In this city of sharp contrasts, where church bells dictated the rhythm of daily life, rose the imposing building of the Orphanage of the Holy Trinity. Built in 1598 with donations from wealthy miners seeking to atone for their sins, the 3-story structure stood out for its austere architecture. Unlike other religious buildings of the time, it lacked decorative excess. Its thick grey stone walls, narrow windows barred with iron, and its silent inner courtyard gave it the appearance of a fortress rather than a home for abandoned children. What most distinguished the orphanage was its chapel, dedicated to the Holy Trinity. Unlike the rest of the building, the chapel was richly adorned, a carved wooden altar covered in gold leaf and a series of unsettling paintings depicting purgatory and hell, meant to remind the children of the consequences of sin. A particularly strange feature was the confessional, unusually large, carved with angels whose expression seemed less comforting than accusing. The Morales family was respected throughout the region for their apparent devotion and their charitable work. Carmen Morales, known as Mother Carmen, ran the orphanage with an iron hand. At 40, her sharp face framed by a severe black habit never showed a smile. Her piercing black eye seemed to detect the slightest transgression, and the children trembled under her gaze. She was said to recite entire passages of the Bible from memory and spend long hours each night in prayer. Her brothers, Fathers Tomás and Geronimo Morales, served in different religious capacities. Tomás, the eldest, a stout man with a booming voice, preached at the main parish of San Miguel, where his fiery sermons about sin and damnation made even adults shudder. Geronimo, the younger, was the opposite, thin, almost fragile. With a soft voice he used to gain the trust of poor families in the outskirts, offering comfort, and as would later be discovered, selecting potential victims. Completing the family circle was Dona Isabel Morales, their wealthy widowed aunt, who generously funded the orphanage and hosted elegant charity events among the colonial elite. Her home, facing the central plaza, was the scene of soirees where rich landowners competed to display their generosity toward the poor little orphans. The orphanage's reputation was immaculate. The colonial society admired the Morales family's noble mission, rescuing abandoned children, providing them education and a trade. Church authorities in Mexico City regularly received glowing reports of the number of children housed, their religious training, and their placement as apprentices or servants in respectable homes. No one questioned that many of those children were never seen again in San Miguel. For 40 years, the Orphanage of the Holy Trinity operated without suspicion, protected by the Morales family's prestige and by the thick walls concealing what truly happened inside. the fire that started it all. It was November 23, 1598, barely 3 months after the Orphanage of the Holy Trinity had opened its doors, when the first accident occurred. That night, one of the coldest ever recorded in San Miguel, a fire devoured a small house in the indigenous quarter east of the city. Flames consumed the modest adobe and wood structure, trapping inside Pedro Hernández, a skilled craftsman, and his wife Maria. Only their 3 children survived: Catalina, aged 8, Miguel, 6, and little Antonio, barely 2 years old. The fire spread so fast that no one could save the couple. Neighbors, awakened by the children's desperate screams, could only watch helplessly as the blaze reduced the home to ashes. When the first light of dawn revealed the smoking ruins, Father Geronimo Morales appeared, as if by divine intervention, offering comfort to the grieving community. "God has placed me here today," he said in a trembling voice while embracing the sobbing children. "These little angels will find refuge in our orphanage, where they shall grow in the love of Christ." The neighbors, moved to tears, thanked the priest for his compassion. No one noticed that the day before, Father Geronimo had visited the Hernández family, supposedly to bless their home. No one paid attention to the faint dark stains on his hands, traces of the oil he had used to coat the wooden beams of the roof while pretending to sprinkle holy water. No one questioned why he appeared so early that morning, before word of the fire had even spread. As Catalina sat in the cart taking her and her brothers toward the orphanage, she looked back at the ruins of her home. Her eyes, red from crying and smoke, fell upon a shiny object among the ashes, her father's silver crucifix that always hung above the doorway. It now lay twisted by heat, yet strangely far from where it should have been, as if someone had removed it before the fire. The girl opened her mouth to say something, but Father Geronimo gently placed his hand on her head. "Pain makes us see things that are not there, child. Your parents are with God now. You must be strong for your brothers." When the 3 Hernández children crossed the heavy wooden gate of the Orphanage of the Holy Trinity, they were greeted by Mother Carmen herself. Her smile never reached her eyes. "Welcome to your new home," she said, inspecting them with the calculating gaze of a merchant evaluating merchandise. "Here, you will learn to serve God and be useful." That very night, Catalina, separated from her brothers, was taken to Mother Carmen's office. The woman removed the small medal of the Virgin that hung around the girl's neck, the last memory of her mother, explaining that earthly possessions are obstacles on the path to God. When Catalina protested, she received her first lesson in the orphanage discipline. 3 blows with an olive wood stick on the palms of her hands. "You will learn to obey," said Mother Carmen coldly, locking the medal inside a chest already filled with other small trinkets and children's keepsakes. "From now on, you are no longer the daughter of Pedro and Maria, you are a daughter of the orphanage. Your past burned with that fire." What Catalina could not know was that this same chest held the last traces of dozens of other stolen lives, little treasures taken from children whose parents had all died in mysterious accidents, all rescued by the Morales family. At dawn the next morning, as the bells rang for the first Mass, Catalina was abruptly awakened and led down to the orphanage's basement. There, in a damp room lit by torches, she witnessed something her young mind could barely comprehend. Dozens of children, some even smaller than her brother Antonio, worked silently, sorting medicinal herbs, sewing small leather pouches, polishing religious medallions. Adults oversaw the work, occasionally striking anyone who slowed down or made a mistake. Mother Carmen pushed Catalina toward a stern-looking woman. "This one is new," she said curtly. "Teach her to be useful." And so began Catalina Hernández's new life, the first of many whose families would be systematically destroyed by the Morales family in their macabre plan to supply what would eventually become a thriving human trafficking network disguised as an act of charity. The case of the Hernández siblings would not be an isolated tragedy. In the months that followed, Other accidents devastated poor families around San Miguel and neighboring villages. A pair of indigenous weavers killed when the roof of their workshop collapsed mysteriously. A carpenter and his pregnant wife dying when their cart's axle snapped on a cliff road. An entire family of 5 poisoned by wild mushrooms after Father Geronimo brought them a stew as a gift from the parish. Each tragedy followed the same pattern, and always, a member of the Morales family appeared first at the scene, offering comfort and a new home for the poor orphans. The townspeople saw these coincidences as divine providence. God always sends the Morales at the right time, they said, unaware that each new orphan represented another link in the chain of horror growing behind the orphanage walls. The machinery of the Morales family. By 1604, 6 years after its founding, the orphanage of the Holy Trinity had already housed more than 70 children. Its reputation grew throughout New Spain. Distinguished visitors occasionally stopped by, bishops traveling to Mexico City, colonial officials, even a representative of the viceroy himself. All left deeply impressed by the order and discipline of the institution. But what they saw was nothing more than a carefully staged performance. Mother Carmen would select the most obedient and well-behaved children to recite prayers, sing hymns, or demonstrate their craftsmanship. The rooms shown to guests were spotless, little beds neatly made, candles burning reverently before the Virgin's image, the air perfumed with incense. The chapel shimmered with light and devotion as Father Tomas led solemn prayers where children thanked God and their benefactors for rescuing them from misery. No visitor was ever taken below, into the basements, where the true orphanage operated. There, in damp and airless rooms, the majority of the children slept crammed onto straw mats, worked 12-hour days, and received just enough food to stay alive. The youngest ones, aged 2 to 5, were kept in a separate area, the nursery, as they called it, and not out of compassion, but because they represented the most valuable merchandise. Over the years, the Morales family perfected their system. They no longer waited for misfortune to strike, they created it. Father Geronimo, with his frail appearance and soft voice, roamed the poorer neighborhoods identifying vulnerable families, those with several children, especially if any had attractive features or unusual talents. Once a target was chosen, the process began. First, Geronimo gained the family's trust, a few medicines for a sick child, a word of recommendation for a better-paying job, some food during a famine. When the family's guard was down, he gathered information, their routines, weaknesses, and habits. Then came the accident, always planned to look like fate's cruelty or sometimes the act of thieves or rivals. The Morales family had developed an arsenal of methods, poisons that mimicked common illnesses, structural sabotages that seemed like natural failures. Father Tomas, who had studied chemistry during his seminary years in Spain, created substances that left no trace, producing symptoms similar to fever or infection. By 1610, their system had expanded beyond San Miguel. Tomas and Geronimo began traveling to nearby towns under the guise of missionary work, in truth, scouting for new victims. Sometimes they returned with indigenous children from remote communities, claiming they had been abandoned or orphaned by disease. No one questioned these stories. Inside the orphanage, the children were classified by characteristics and potential. The most attractive, especially those with lighter, European features, were trained to be sold to wealthy families who could not have children. Pretty girls over 12 were placed as servants in the homes of single men, or sent to establishments in mining cities where their domestic work had nothing to do with cleaning. Strong boys were dispatched to mines or remote estates as virtual slaves. The brightest children were given basic education, not out of kindness, but because they could serve as messengers, assistants, or even spies within the Morales' growing web of business. To maintain control, the family relied on psychological terror. Children were taught that their souls were damned, and only absolute obedience could save them. Any act of defiance was punished brutally. Attempts to escape ended in public torture meant to instill fear. Father Tomás even converted one section of the basement into a penitent's room, a chamber of punishment where disobedient children were subjected to ordeals that left scars both physical and mental. Yet even in this environment of horror, not every child broke. Some clung to faint memories of the lives they'd lost, and to the fragile hope of one day escaping. Among them, Catalina Hernández stood out. By 1610, she was a young woman of 20. Unlike the others, she had never forgotten how her parents had died, nor lost sight of her younger brothers, though the Morales ensured they were kept apart most of the time. Catalina learned to survive by pretending obedient on the surface, watchful underneath. Her intelligence and composure earned her a position as assistant in the orphanage infirmary, a role that granted her more freedom of movement and access to confidential information. Over the years, she quietly gathered evidence. She memorized names, dates, and destinations of the adopted children. She noted the patterns in the Morales brothers' travels and the visits of merchants and officials who came for secret meetings behind closed doors. Each night, before sleeping, she whispered her findings to her brother Miguel, now 18, assigned to building maintenance. Together they kept the memory of their family alive and the spark of rebellion growing. But Catalina didn't know she wasn't the only one watching. In the community, a new observer had begun to take notice of the orphanage's strange activity, an old Dominican friar named Domingo de la Cruz, who had come to San Miguel in 1608 to retire after decades as a missionary. From his small cell in the Dominican convent, which overlooked the orphanage's back courtyard, Fray Domingo saw things that others ignored. Carts arriving late at night, bundles carried in silence, muffled cries cut off abruptly. He tried to visit the orphanage several times, but was always turned away. The children are quarantined with fever. Mother Carmen is in spiritual retreat. We are under renovation, it's dangerous for someone of your age. Each excuse only deepened his suspicion. The old friar began asking discreet questions among the townsfolk, families who had lost relatives in strange accidents. Gradually, he mapped a pattern too coincidental to be ignored. He also noticed something chilling, that many children said to be adopted by respectable families were never seen again. That winter of 1610, Fray Domingo decided to act. He sent a sealed letter to his former student, now secretary to the Bishop of Puebla, describing his suspicions and requesting a discreet investigation. The letter never arrived. The messenger, a young novice, was found dead on the road, attacked by bandits. The letter vanished. 3 weeks later, Fray Domingo fell suddenly ill after drinking a cup of chocolate that had been kindly gifted to him by Father Tomás Morales. That same night, he died in convulsions. His death was attributed to old age and the cold of the Mexican winter. And with him, the only investigation into the orphanage's dark secret died as well. The Silent Empire. By 1625, more than 25 years after the fire that destroyed her family, Catalina Hernández had become one of the oldest residents of the Orphanage of the Holy Trinity. But to outsiders, she no longer existed. Her name had been erased from every record, replaced by a new identity, Sister Catalina of the Cross, a nun sworn to service within the orphanage. What no one outside the walls suspected was that this institution, once a modest shelter, had become the nucleus of a vast underground empire. Through decades of manipulation, the Morales family had built connections across New Spain. In Puebla, Guanajuato, Zacatecas, and even Veracruz. Their orphans were now traded like goods, sent on carts disguised as supply deliveries or escorted by clerics under false adoption documents. Each shipment brought the Morales immense profit and more influence. Father Tomás Morales, now gray-haired but still imposing, had risen in power. He used his fiery sermons and his connections with the Inquisition to control those who might speak against him. Behind his reputation for holiness, he dealt in forged baptismal records, illicit adoptions, and the trafficking of minors across the colony. His younger brother, Father Geronimo, had grown quieter but no less dangerous. He managed the field operations, securing new victims, bribing local officials, and silencing witnesses. And though age had softened his voice, his eyes still held the same cold cunning that had doomed the Hernández family decades before. As for Mother Carmen, she no longer oversaw the daily punishments. Her health had declined, but her presence remained a shadow of terror. Confined to her quarters, she demanded nightly reports and still dictated orders with iron precision. Children who disobeyed were taken to her room at night and never returned. Yet within this fortress of cruelty, Catalina continued to watch, to remember, and to plan. She had grown into a woman of quiet strength, her features hardened by years of endurance. Her younger brother Miguel had become a skilled carpenter, often sent to repair local churches. This allowed him occasional contact with the outside world, and a chance to gather whispers from sympathetic priests and merchants who had begun to suspect that something inside the orphanage was deeply wrong. During one such errand, Miguel met a young friar named Fray Alonso de Mendoza, recently arrived from Spain. Idealistic, sincere, and uncorrupted, Alonso was struck by Miguel's haunted expression. Over weeks of cautious conversation, Miguel revealed fragments of the truth, enough to plant the seed of doubt in Alonso's heart. When he later visited the orphanage to deliver alms, Alonso saw the same contradictions that had once unsettled Fray Domingo. The excessive secrecy, the locked doors, the absence of older children. He noticed that those who greeted him had hollow eyes and flinched at every movement of the priests. That night, Alonso returned to his convent deeply disturbed. He prayed for guidance and decided to help Miguel and Catalina expose the Morales family. But Catalina, hardened by years of deception, warned him. "You don't understand. They are not men of God, they are men who believe God belongs to them." Together, they began gathering evidence, names, dates, forged papers, hidden ledgers. Miguel smuggled them out, hiding them in the hollow base of a wooden crucifix that would later be sent to the convent as a gift. Alonso, meanwhile, wrote detailed letters to his superiors in Mexico City, carefully concealing his words with theological language so only the church's internal investigators would understand the true meaning. However, the Morales network was too vast to remain blind. Rumors of a spy within the convent reached Father Tomás, who quietly ordered an inquiry. Weeks later, one of the younger nuns, frightened and eager to please, confessed that she had seen Catalina speaking privately with a man outside the chapel gates. That night, guards broke into Catalina's cell. They tore apart her mattress, her few belongings, even the stone floor, and found nothing. But suspicion had been enough. The next morning, Miguel was summoned under the pretext of repairing the bell tower. When he didn't return, Catalina felt a deep, instinctive dread. Hours later, she was called to Mother Carmen's quarters. Inside, the air reeked of incense and burnt wax. Mother Carmen, frail yet terrifying, sat on her bed with the rosary wrapped tightly around her hand. At her feet lay Miguel's rosary, broken, blood-stained. "Your brother has confessed," said Father Tomás, stepping out of the shadows. "He admitted that you both conspired with heretics to defame this holy institution. For that, he has received God's judgment." Catalina's scream echoed through the halls. Tomás raised his hand. "Silence. You will not be punished, not yet. You will remain here to pray for your brother's soul. In time, you will understand that his death was an act of mercy." That night, Catalina sat motionless in her cell. The orphanage was silent, too silent. She knew that if she didn't act soon, she would follow Miguel into the same darkness. The next morning, she made her choice. Under the cover of dawn, she took the keys she had secretly copied during her years in the infirmary and slipped into the restricted wing. There, she entered a room she had never dared open before, a room sealed for decades. What she found inside would haunt her for the rest of her life. Dozens of small coffins, stacked one atop another, filled the chamber from floor to ceiling. Each marked with a number, not a name. And among them, a table on which lay a ledger, filled with columns of transactions, prices, and destinations. The Orphanage of the Holy Trinity was not a sanctuary. It was a marketplace. Catalina took the ledger, wrapped it in her habit, and escaped through the underground passage used for deliveries. By the time the alarm sounded, she was already miles away, riding one of the merchant carts headed for Guanajuato, carrying the only proof that could destroy the Morales Empire. The price of truth. Catalina rode through the night, clutching the ledger to her chest as if it were her own beating heart. Each page she carried was a graveyard, names, dates, ages, destinations. Every line represented a stolen life, a soul that had vanished under the false blessing of the church. By the time she reached Guanajuato, exhaustion had nearly broken her. Her hands bled from gripping the cart rails, her lips cracked from the desert wind. But she did not stop. She knew that if she rested, she would never wake again. Her destination was the convent of Santa Lucia, a modest sanctuary under the protection of the Bishop of Michoacan, a man rumored to be incorruptible. When she arrived, the nuns took her in, offering water and bread, unaware of the secret she carried. Only when she insisted on speaking with the Mother Superior did the truth begin to unfold. "I have evidence," she whispered, her voice trembling, "of what they've done in San Miguel. The children, they're not orphans. They're taken. Sold." The Mother Superior's face paled. She listened in silence as Catalina showed her the ledger, the pages filled with handwriting identical to that of Father Tomás Morales. At the bottom of each page, a seal, the symbol of the Holy Office, the Inquisition. The nun's hand shook as she crossed herself. "Child, do you understand what this means? If this reaches the wrong hands, you'll be condemned, and so will we." "I don't care," Catalina said firmly. "Someone has to stop them." The Mother Superior hesitated only a moment before locking the ledger in an iron chest. "You will rest now," she said. "At dawn, I will send word to the bishop. He will know what to do." For the first time in decades, Catalina allowed herself to sleep, a deep, dreamless sleep filled with silence instead of screams. When she awoke the next morning, the convent was eerily quiet. She went to the chapel, empty. The candles had burned down to wax pools. A faint smell of smoke hung in the air. Then she saw it, the chest that had contained the ledger, gone. A door creaked behind her. Two men stood at the entrance, dressed not in priestly robes, but in the black garments of the Holy Office. Between them, the bishop himself. "Catalina Hernández," he said solemnly. "By order of the Inquisition, you are under arrest for bearing false witness against servants of God." Her body froze. "They're lying," she whispered. "You have the proof." "The ledger?" "The ledger," interrupted the bishop, "has been examined. It contains forgeries and blasphemies. You are delusional, a woman consumed by vengeance." Before she could speak, one of the men struck her across the face. Blood filled her mouth. The bishop turned away. "May God have mercy on your soul." That night, Catalina was taken not to prison, but to a cloistered asylum near Querétaro, one operated, ironically, by the same order that had once praised the Morales family for their charity. There she was kept in isolation, interrogated for months, and forced to sign confessions declaring that she had been possessed by envy and demonic illusion. Years passed. The world outside changed, but inside those walls, time stood still. The Morales continued their work, now under new names and new disguises, protected by the very church Catalina had hoped would deliver justice. But fate, as always, has its own rhythm. In 1642, nearly 2 decades after Catalina's imprisonment, a new bishop, Francisco de Villalobos, was appointed to oversee the central region of New Spain. A man of genuine faith and a relentless sense of duty, he ordered an inspection of every religious institution under his jurisdiction. When the inspectors reached San Miguel de Allende, they found the Orphanage of the Holy Trinity in disarray. Mother Carmen had long died, her mummified body preserved in her quarters as a relic. The building was nearly abandoned, its corridors silent, its chapel overrun by dust and cobwebs. But when the investigators forced open the sealed basement doors, the same ones Catalina had once escaped through, what they discovered would shake the foundations of the church itself. Hundreds of bones. Small skulls, tiny rib cages, rusted manacles, and scorched brands with the initials MM, Morales Militia Christi. Among the remains, they found a decaying wooden chest. Inside it, a rosary, a torn habit, and several pages of a ledger identical to the one Catalina had once carried. It was enough. The church immediately ordered the site sealed and all surviving members of the Morales family arrested. Tomás Morales, too ill to travel, was found dead in his cell before he could be interrogated. Geronimo disappeared, his fate never confirmed. Some claimed he fled to Veracruz and sailed to Spain, others whispered he hid in the mines, living as a ghost until he was buried alive. When Bishop Villalobos read the fragments of Catalina's testimony, preserved by chance among the confiscated papers, he ordered a search for her. She was found in 1643, still alive, though frail and nearly blind, in the convent asylum. When told that the orphanage had finally been exposed, she wept silently. "All I wanted," she said softly, "was for someone to listen." She died 3 days later. Her remains were buried in an unmarked grave near the asylum chapel. But the bishop ordered that her words, her final confession, be copied and sealed within the Vatican archives for future generations to uncover. And so, for nearly 400 years, her truth remained hidden until now. That was the untold story of Catalina Hernández and the Morales family, a tale buried under centuries of silence, deceit, and faith twisted into power. Some say that even today, the ruins of the old orphanage in San Miguel still echo with the faint cries of children who never found peace. Others claim that, on certain nights, a woman in a dark habit walks its corridors, carrying a single candle, searching for the ledger she once lost. Epilogue: the silence beneath the church. Centuries have passed since the day the gates of the Orphanage of the Holy Trinity were sealed. The building still stands in the old quarter of San Miguel de Allende, its walls cracked, its windows sealed with iron, its chapel long abandoned. Tourists who pass by during daylight see only another relic of the colonial era, unaware of what lies buried beneath the stone. But when night falls, locals say the air changes. Some claim to hear soft murmurs echoing from underground, whispers in children's voices, counting prayers in Latin over and over again. Others insist that if you approach the iron gate after midnight, you can see the faint flicker of a candle moving slowly down the main corridor, held by the silhouette of a woman in a nun's habit. They call her La Hermana del Silencio, the Sister of Silence. No one knows if it's the restless soul of Catalina Hernández, still wandering the place that stole her life, or something far older, a memory burned into the walls by centuries of suffering. But one thing is certain. The Church has never officially recognized what happened there. The documents recovered by Bishop Villalobos remain locked away, hidden deep within the archives of the Vatican, under the classification de orphanato trinitatis, forbidden. Even so, a handful of historians who've had rare access to those files agree on one disturbing detail. The name Morales appears again, decades later, in records of new orphanages established across New Spain. Different cities. Different centuries. Same seal. Same initials, MM. Perhaps the darkness never truly died. Perhaps it only changed its name. Those who profit from faith will always build temples around their sins. But the walls remember. The earth remembers. And one day, the silence speaks. If you enjoyed this story and want more untold histories buried in shadows, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell icon, and let us know in the comments. What do you think happened to the last of the Morales family? This was the macabre story of the Morales family, the truth never told. Thank you for listening, and until the next Historia Tenebrosa. The screen fades to black. A soft echo of church bells lingers before silence.